Hi, please subscribe to our new podcast, This Case Takes Place. The links are below. Also, subscribe to this channel because I'm trying to get to 1 billion subscribers. This case takes place in the UK in the year 2024. Daniel Angerin grew up in a loving household in East London. His parents described him as an amazing son whose smile brightened the entire household, the kind of son and brother that any family would be proud of. As the eldest brother, Daniel often helped his younger siblings with homework. He was described by teachers as a gifted student. He constantly earned top grades, showing particular passion for science and music. Outside the classroom, Daniel was an enthusiastic football fan who loved Arsenal Football Club. His bedroom filled with memorabilia, and he rarely missed a game. By early 2024, Daniel was thriving. He was learning piano, another hobby that he loved, and he often volunteered for community cleanups with his local church. The morning of the 30th of April 2024 began like any other day for Daniel. He woke up and got ready for school, said bye to his mother, and headed off. Nobody in Daniel's family imagined that this ordinary morning would be his last. Daniel put on his headphones and began walking to school in Hainault, London. Meanwhile, in this area, commuters headed towards the tube station, and parents prepared their children for school. But at around 6:45 a.m, this peaceful morning suddenly turned into total chaos. Residents in the area heard an engine revving loudly, followed by the sounds of metal crashing. A grey Ford Transit van had swerved sharply off the road, smashing through a garden fence onto someone's property. In the van's path was a 33-year-old man named Donato, who had been walking to work. Donato was struck violently by the van and was thrown into a front garden by the force of the impact. Neighbours initially thought that this was a tragic accident. Some rushed towards the wreckage, hoping to help anyone who was injured, but they quickly realised that something far worse was happening. Stumbling from the vehicle came the driver, a man wearing a yellow hoodie, bloodied from the crash. When concerned bystanders approached him, the man asked in a dazed voice, "Where am I?" As a woman started to answer his question, he suddenly reached towards his waistband and pulled out a 60-centimetre long samurai sword, which he had concealed in his trousers. Without hesitation, this man lunged at Donato, who was still lying injured from the collision. The attacker swung the curved blade down on Donato's neck, whilst yelling that he was going to kill him. Donato stared up in terror, desperately trying to scramble away, but the sword sliced deeply into his neck. Blood began pouring from his wound as he screamed in agony. This was the beginning of a brutal killing spree. Panicked cries filled the streets as residents fled to safety. Despite his severe injury, Donato managed to get up and run away with one hand tightly pressed against the wound to stop the bleeding. He later learned from doctors that he had escaped death by millimeters. If he did not act swiftly, Donato could have bled out in less than 1 minute. As Donato ran from the attacker, he heard the man shouting angrily behind him. Donato later recalled thinking that he was supposed to be dead. Eventually, he was able to outrun the attacker, but instead, the attacker turned his rage towards the rest of the street. Terrified residents awakened by screams and shouting began frantically dialing 999, reporting that a man was attacking people in the neighbourhood. The attacker roamed the street, shouting obscenities, and at one point bizarrely yelling, "Is there anybody here who believes in God?" Holding the bloodied sword, he jumped fences and raced through gardens, searching for more victims. And he found one. At around 7 a.m, just minutes after the first attack, 14-year-old Daniel was walking down his street towards the tube station. Daniel was totally unaware that he was heading directly into the path of the rampaging attacker. As I mentioned before, he had his headphones on. He couldn't hear a thing. Neighbours who spotted the armed attacker desperately tried to warn Daniel by shouting and waving from a distance. Daniel, however, did not notice their frantic attempts to alert him. Moments later, the crazed attacker saw innocent Daniel. Sensing easy prey, the attacker quickly and quietly moved closer. Then, without warning, he lunged from behind. Before Daniel could react, the attacker swung the sword viciously, slicing deep into the back of his neck. The deep chopping injury to the side of Daniel's neck and head can only be described as near decapitation. There was no way that Daniel could survive. He stumbled forward, confused in pain. Without a moment to process what had happened to him, the attacker struck again. This time, it was a penetrating stab wound to the chest. The blade pierced vital organs, and Daniel collapsed mortally wounded onto the pavement. A neighbour watching in horror screamed as Daniel fell into his own pool of blood. The attack was so sudden that Daniel literally had no chance to defend himself. As Daniel lay bleeding, the attacker briefly disappeared from view behind nearby bushes. Within moments, an ambulance arrived. As the paramedics approached Daniel to help, the attacker suddenly reappeared, swinging his sword violently at the ambulance itself and shouting threats. The paramedics were forced to retreat for their own safety, unable to immediately reach Daniel. The paramedics helplessly watched from a distance as critical seconds passed. Next, 2 Metropolitan Police officers were able to arrive on foot. Seeing Daniel collapsed on the pavement, they immediately rushed towards him, unaware that the attacker was lurking nearby. One of these officers was PC Yasmin Meckham Whitfield. As Yasmin knelt down to help Daniel, the attacker jumped from the bushes just meters away and charged at the officers. Caught off guard, Yasmin fell to the ground. The attacker stood over her and began hacking her with his sword. He delivered multiple savage blows, striking her arm, hand, and skull as she desperately tried to shield herself. The injuries were devastating. The killer severely fractured her skull and nearly severed her arm. Another officer arriving to assist, named Inspector Malloy Campbell, confronted the attacker, and he did so with only a baton in his hand. Inspector Campbell bravely lunged forward, attempting to disarm the attacker and protect his fallen colleague. But in response, the attacker swung his sword and slashed Campbell's hand and cut deeply through tendons and bone. Despite the immense pain, Inspector Campbell's bravery likely saved Yasmin's life, as he was able to draw attention from the attacker. And before too long, more police officers rushed to the scene from every direction. The attacker realized that he was totally cornered. And so he fled. He jumped over fences and through gardens and between houses. In his desperate escape, the attacker forced his way through a back garden and burst into a family's home at around 7:10 a.m. Inside this house was a 35-year-old man named Henry Polania, along with his partner Cindy. They woke up in terror as the sword-wielding intruder crashed into their bedroom. The couple had been asleep alongside their 4-year-old child. Henry instinctively shielded his partner and his kid from the attacker, who charged forward, slashing his sword wildly. Henry raised his arms in defense, taking a deep cut from the blade across his forearm and his hand. Blood splattered across the bed and walls, but Henry continued to fight off the attacker, giving Cindy a chance to grab their child and retreat. For a moment, the attacker hesitated. He abruptly turned and fled the home, leaving Henry seriously wounded, but still alive. Henry was later hailed as a hero for risking his life to protect his family. Now outside once again, the attacker was at the end of his rampage. Police units flooded the suburban streets as sirens rang out and a helicopter circled overhead. The attacker was still shouting incoherently, but now he was climbing on garages and roofs, desperately trying to evade capture. Police officers armed with tasers and firearms quickly closed in. The final confrontation occurred in a resident's driveway. Multiple officers surrounded the blood-soaked suspect. They ordered him to drop his sword, but he just refused and advanced towards them. Police responded by repeatedly firing tasers, hitting the attacker multiple times. Initially, the attacker resisted despite the jolts from the taser darts. It took several more taser bursts and a swarm of officers to finally subdue him. Even as they tackled him to the ground, the attacker fought back fiercely, requiring multiple officers to pry the sword from his grip. But finally, the police secured the attacker in handcuffs, and the deadly rampage was over. The man laid in the driveway breathing heavily, muttering a mix of English and Spanish. His face and clothes were splattered with blood, some his own, but most from his innocent victims. Paramedics immediately rushed to assist the wounded. Tragically, Daniel showed no pulse when the medics finally reached him. His injuries were catastrophic. They frantically performed CPR as they loaded him into the ambulance, but there was nothing they could do. Across the street, colleagues treated Yasmin's severe injuries by applying makeshift tourniquets while awaiting another ambulance. Inspector Campbell sat nearby, holding his badly wounded hand. Henry was guided outside, bleeding heavily from his injured arm. In total, the street was a scene of devastating chaos. One teenager lay dying, and 4 others, including 2 police officers, were seriously wounded, and this was all from a single attacker. An ordinary morning had turned into one of London's most brutal random attacks in recent memory, a shocking spree of bloodshed targeting innocent people who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But who had the police just arrested, and why was he causing so much damage and carnage? Well, the police quickly learned that this man's name was Marcus Monzo. Marcus was a seemingly ordinary man who transformed into an infamous killer. He was born in April of 1988, and he grew up in a small village near Brazil. His childhood, by all accounts, was stable and comfortable. People who knew him said he was polite and adventurous. In his late teens, he briefly lived in the United States, but it was in 2013 that Marcus sought new opportunities and he relocated to London, England. Marcus initially adapted well to life in London. He worked at a pub and rented a room in East London and quickly became comfortable in his new surroundings. He joined a jiu-jitsu gym, and friends said that he was friendly, humorous, and easygoing. He enjoyed nights out, socializing, and had no criminal record. However, Marcus was quietly developing a dependency on cannabis, a dependency that eventually dominated his life. Over several years, his casual habit escalated dramatically into a daily addiction, costing him around £100 each day. He smoked potent skunk cannabis from morning until night, and he became paranoid and anxious. But rather than quitting, Marcus increased his drug use, adding powerful hallucinogenics such as LSD and psilocybin mushrooms into his routine. As his drug use deepened, his mental health sharply declined. He started searching obsessively for spiritual meaning through unconventional methods. After a knee injury halted his jiu-jitsu, Marcus turned to yoga and meditation. He became a devoted follower of Sadhguru, consuming countless hours of the guru's videos and books. In 2018, Marcus travelled to India to live at a yoga ashram, seeking enlightenment. After returning from this trip, friends noticed that Marcus spoke obsessively about cosmic energy and spirituality. He seemed to be a different person. In 2021, he visited Brazil for a retreat. It was here where he consumed large amounts of ayahuasca, which is a powerful psychedelic drink. Following this, he drifted away from his family, rarely calling his mother and brother back in the US. When he did speak to them, his conversations were increasingly strange and detached. Marcus spoke about secret societies and insisted that he had discovered immortality through meditation and extreme dietary practices. He attempted breatharianism, a belief that one could survive on air and sunlight alone. Marcus also developed bizarre routines, including drinking his own urine daily, claiming that it purified his soul. His beliefs became increasingly paranoid and conspiratorial. He claimed the Earth was flat and ruled by reptilian humanoids, with the Pope as their leader. He openly expressed admiration for Adolf Hitler and grew fixated on people like Andrew Tate. These views isolated Marcus even further from his friends, who became increasingly uncomfortable around him. Online, Marcus immersed himself in conspiracy forums and extremist groups. He frequently posted radical and alarming content. Meanwhile, Marcus's fascination with weapons also intensified. He had collected martial arts weapons during his jiu-jitsu days, but now he began acquiring real battle-ready swords online. He ordered full-length Japanese-style katana swords. He proudly filmed himself handling these deadly weapons. In one disturbing video, Marcus unsheathed a katana, whispering ominously that he would soon do something special with it. This chilling footage later emerged as clear evidence of his dark intentions. The most disturbing sign of Marcus's deteriorating mental state was his violence towards his own pet cat. Marcus killed his pet and claimed it was for spiritual reasons. He placed the animal's remains in his van and drove around London with the carcass. This disturbing cruelty illustrated how dangerously unhinged Marcus had become. Despite this act and other clear warning signs, Marcus remained unnoticed by the authorities. He never sought or received professional mental health treatment for these actions. People around Marcus either didn't realize the extent of his psychosis, or they felt unable to intervene. By early 2024, Marcus was isolated, lost in his delusions, and obsessed with his self-proclaimed mission. It would be the 30th of April 2024 that Marcus's delusions exploded into real violence in a chilling example of mental illness, radicalization, and drug addiction left unchecked. In the aftermath of the rampage, the Metropolitan Police detectives worked swiftly to understand exactly what led Marcus to commit these horrific acts. Once in police custody, Marcus appeared agitated and disorientated, talking nonsense and suggesting that he was hearing voices. Investigators quickly began examining Marcus's mental state. He underwent psychiatric evaluation by specialists who monitored him closely, and he was clearly on drugs. During the first days of custody, Marcus claimed that he was talking to imaginary figures and described hearing voices that commanded him to carry out acts of violence. However, as he sobered up, Marcus began to regain lucidity. Investigators now faced a critical question. Was Marcus genuinely suffering from a severe underlying mental illness, or had he induced temporary psychosis through intense drug use? Evidence soon emerged that Marcus had no history of diagnosed psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, and when Marcus's flat was searched, they found a disturbing trove of evidence that pointed to a planned rampage. They found notebooks filled with conspiracy-laden manifestos and bizarre ramblings. His phone contained evidence of extremist, hateful, and violent content. Marcus had recently watched numerous far-right propaganda videos, misogynistic materials, and documentaries about historical weapons and infamous killers. On social media, Marcus had written about a fantasy identity that he called the Master, who he claimed commanded him to carry out acts of violence. In one alarming post, Marcus described himself as a trained assassin fulfilling some imaginary mission. Police also examined Marcus's vehicle, the grey Ford Transit van that was used in the attack. In the back of the van, investigators discovered the remains of Marcus's cat. On the 1st of May 2024, just one day after the attack, Marcus was formally charged with murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. He also faced charges of grievous bodily harm, aggravated burglary, and possession of offensive weapons. The trial began in June of 2025. From the start, Marcus's responsibility for the physical attacks was undisputed. The central issue in the courtroom became his mental state and his criminal culpability. Marcus was 37 at the time of his trial, and he appeared to be visibly different. Marcus pleaded not guilty to the murder charges. His defense argued that Marcus had experienced a severe psychotic episode, claiming that he was not fully aware of his actions. They claimed that he was showing classic symptoms of psychosis, including hearing voices, paranoia, grandiose beliefs, among other things. Marcus also spoke to the courtroom. He described his mindset on the day as dreamlike, believing that he was following symbolic instructions he perceived as real. He insisted that he had little memory of the attacks, implying a total loss of control to a secondary persona. However, British law does not allow intoxicated-induced psychosis as a valid defense for murder, so this really couldn't be used as any kind of defense. Daniel's family then addressed the court. They spoke about the pain and anguish of losing Daniel, stating that their lives will never be the same with him gone. The police body cam footage and other crime scene evidence was shown to the courtroom. The court was left deeply horrified at what Marcus had done and what he was capable of. After 3 intense weeks, Marcus was found guilty of all charges. Sentencing followed 2 days later. Marcus received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years, meaning that he has to serve 40 years before he is eligible for parole. After those 40 years are over, he might still not be released if he is deemed too dangerous. Marcus, now convicted, began serving his life sentence under high security, with close monitoring due to concerns about his mental health. His case prompted public debate about how someone with clear psychological issues and a history of drug abuse had easily acquired deadly weapons online. Many began requesting for stricter controls on bladed weapons, along with improved mental health outreach to prevent similar tragedies. However, tragically, this is a case as old as time. Somewhere out there unnoticed, another tragedy is waiting for its moment, and when it strikes, we will ask ourselves the same painful questions, wondering how we missed the signs once again.